In this video, we are going to be working on this Danchee RidgeRock. We're going to be working on getting the truck lower to the ground, to lower the center of gravity, and doing a couple things to move some weight to the front of the vehicle to help it with balance, help it with hill climbing ability, all of this in order to bring this truck truly to the next level, but still on a budget-oriented fashion. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Troy, and this is Roadside RC. You'll tend to find me crawling and bashing and drifting and racing, plus doing product review videos and how-tos. And I've been pretty happy with this Danchee RidgeRock ever since I got it. I've only been doing a few modifications to it so far. You'll see obviously clearly the tires and wheels that have been done here. Big impact, big improvement there. And then in a recent video, we actually also put these 20 kg servos with and eliminated the servo saver up here at the front, made a huge impact there, also over doubling the steering power and getting rid of that sloppy servo saver in it has made a big impact to how this vehicle could steer and can perform. But there's still something that I'm not too happy with. It does tend to be a little side tippy. A lot of weight is up high. The battery and the ESC is all mounted up here. And then when you look at the truck, it's pretty dang tall. It's pretty high off the ground. It could really use dropping, a half inch or so more in order to lower that center of gravity. We're going to use some shock keys here in order to help that, in order to help relocate those top shock mounts. And that's going to help lower that center of gravity overall. But that's not all. I also have a 3D printed battery mount that'll actually mount right up here on top of the servo location, and that'll allow me to move weight forward. So get that battery that we're using and actually get it up here in the front. That'll help move that weight to the front and really help us with performance that way. And I'll provide a link down below in the video description to where you can download this file and print it yourself. Lastly is I want to add some weight to this front axle, and nobody makes parts for it. Nobody makes any kind of brass knuckles or anything like that for it. So what I'm going to do is take the axle housing apart and see if I can't get some of these stick-on lead wheel weights down into the bottom of the axle housing itself in order to, again, bring some weight way down low into the front of this truck. With these three things together, it should really transform the performance of this truck. So we're going to get started. First thing is with the shock keys. Before we get started, we need to have a baseline weight. And so I'm going to use this SkyRC corner weight system. And that's going to give us interesting, very, very interesting. I hope you can see this. It might be flickering a little bit in the GoPro. We are currently 50-50 weight distribution. This is with a battery in the center here. 50-50 weight distribution, 919, 918, so basically there. Front, rear, and side. I've never had a vehicle that's been perfect like that. So it is literally balanced all around with a total weight of 1838. And so what we're going to be doing is how much of that 900 grams in the rear can we move to the front? And then is there any way for us to add some more to the front, period? So this is what we're going to be looking at. These shock keys are really actually a pretty nice, simple tuning tool for your suspension. This Danchee RidgeRock does come with multiple suspension mounting points to start with, but they're all pretty close together, which means they don't really make that much difference. This shock keys you can actually put in somehow. You use a couple screws to mount it in here, and you can either mount it kind of backwards and move the shock back, which also helps increase flex and reduce the ride height. You can mount them almost straight up and down and then mount the shock on here somewhere. Again, that'll reduce it, but heck, even if you wanted to raise the truck, you can put them down here and you could move the shock down and it would actually increase the truck height. And one thing that we've seen some people do on the old Everest 10s is you actually put them like this forward, and then that helps you stand up the shock. And as you have more power, that reduces torque twist with the vehicle. So all of these are things that you can do with them. They're very cheap, easy to get a hold of. And then only thing with them is you do need to provide your own hardware. So they don't come with any screws at all. So you need to raid your spare screw bin and then figure out how you want to mount it up here. So I'm gonna play with this a little bit, see what kind of mounting angles seem like it works for this truck, and I will report back. There we go. Now this is the first corner finally done. I was able to figure out how to put the key in about almost a vertical position. What that did require is for me to space the shock out a little bit to make sure that it didn't bind with it. Now what I used as a spacer, honestly just some stuff I had laying around. If you recognize this, this is the little bushings that tend to come with servos. And you know, hey, just replaced servos, didn't use these, and as it turns out, fortunately, they work really well as little spacers. So I have those along with a screw that I had here from, you know, my leftover screw bins, and this is marked up, and we're probably dropped, I don't know, a little over a ½ inch or so. We do that all the way around, and this truck's going to be sitting nice and low for us, which is a great thing. So I'm going to keep doing that, and that'll help lower down this total center of gravity of the truck. Check that out. That is one mean looking crawler. I did the same exact thing front and rear. It dropped this whole thing down about, like I said, about a ½ inch or so according to my measurements. We haven't lost any flex or anything because we didn't actually change the geometry of any of the rear suspension. All we did was drop all of this down, but the shocks and everything are still sitting at the same angle, which means we still have all the same flex and everything, just the center of gravity is much lower. That is looking, it just looks mean. Next step is we're going to look at this front mount battery. To install this battery mount's actually really easy. It looks like it's just going to take these 4 servo mounting screws out, slide this on, put those 4 servo mounting screws back on. Do make sure, as there is a slot in the bottom for it, you can actually wrap your Velcro that's going to hold the battery down. You can actually wrap it around there. We can probably actually steal the factory one if we wanted to. It looks like it's probably the right size for it, so we can actually just use it. Oh, there we are. Look at that. Now, one thing I did do is I actually mounted this battery mounting plate behind the servo tab. That's because this servo tab has some little ears on it here that wouldn't allow this to sit flush. I also had to change out the factory servo mounting screws for the ones that came with the servo because they were longer and they made up for the difference in this printed surface here. Now, a couple things I will note about the design that you see here is the tray here that holds the battery is curved because it's made more to use the factory battery, not the 3S LiPo that I'm using here now. So it doesn't fit exactly perfect, but the curve does go wider than the battery, which does help hold it in there. And even with that little bit of Velcro and this much battery sticking back, it does feel nice and tight in there. Battery leads can actually just go through this frame here. Seems like it holds everything nice and tight. So this has already made a noticeable difference to how this truck looks, to how it's going to handle and everything. We are really in much better shape. Well, I just noticed a problem. Did you notice it? With this, with the battery mounted as it is, the rear, good suspension articulation up and down. The front, wait a second. There's nothing because the battery is acting as a block between the front axle and this bar in here. So we have 2 choices. We could cut out this bar in order to let it have more freedom. We could move the battery forward more to allow the suspension to move, but then it's actually going to stick through the front grille, which is not ideal. So what I'm going to end up doing is probably swapping over to this 1500 CNHL battery that I have. Using a smaller 3S battery, getting it in there, it will fit with plenty of room for the body to fit over the front of it and for the chassis to articulate behind it. And that's only going from a 2200 to a 1500 milliamp battery. There's other choices out there that you could use that would also work, but this is what I have handy and it should work pretty well. Now we could stop here and probably be in great shape, but we're going to go on to the last thing that we talked about, which is how to add a little bit of weight down inside this front axle housing using some lead weights, moldable weights that we have. So that means you got to get the wheels off, we got to take off these C-hubs, we got to blow those out, and then we have a whole bunch of screws here that help hold the front top and bottom of this whole front differential together. So we got to take all that apart and see what kind of room we have in here to get some of these weights down in it. Wheels and tires along with hexes and the pins are off. I'm going to take these lower control arms loose, these top and bottom mounting screws to the C-hub, and see if I can get lucky enough to slide this whole thing out as one. Probably not going to have to. Probably going to have to take these top and bottom screws off also and take this hub off first, then the rest of it in order to get that apart. Just for clarity, yes, I did have to take the hub off first, those two screws out, and I went ahead and just disconnected it from the steering linkage also. Then the two small screws here that go through the C-hub, and then that C-hub can come off once you have loosened the very small little set screw down here in the end of this drive shaft and pulled out the cross pin. You must do that first in order for that to come loose. This axle, unlike other tent scale crawlers, the axle doesn't slide out. Over here on this side, I'll show you what I'm talking about. So again, right here in the very end, right in the very tip of this is a very, very small set screw. Gotta take that out, and then this cross pin comes out. With that out of the way, we now have a whole bunch of little Phillips screws in here in order to separate this whole housing. With this open, this is quite interesting. It looks, one, you can see the motor, small pinion with all the gear reduction that it has. Every time you go from small to big, that's a gear reduction. So there's 1, 2, 3 big gear reduction steps in this front axle to let this motor work. Good news is we do have a big empty cavity right here. This will be in the top of the diff housing. When we look at how that folds over, it kind of correlates to this spot right in here. We may have just a little bit of room right in this part and this part also. We won't be able to use anything in here because that's where the motor is, and we want to make sure that it has good airflow around it. So there's still a couple places here though where we might be able to smash in some of these lead weights. So I'm going to get them out of the package and see what we can do. After messing with this for a while, I'm able to get 5 total of these weights in here. It turns out these weights that I purchased are actually pretty hard. They're not the soft, malleable kind that I thought they were, which would have allowed me to lay some in a couple of other places. So I have 2 stacked up down here, 1 on its side, and then 2 in this top cover, all in this one location. Those are all 1/4 ounce each, and so we put a little bit, and put 1 1/4 ounce total in this front, in this axle for almost 0 cost, because these weights are really, really cheap. I'm going to put it all back together, and then we are going to weigh this thing and give it a test drive. Moment of truth, we have the different battery all mounted up here at the front. We have the weight in the front axle. We have the whole truck lower. Clearly making the whole truck lower is not going to make a difference on this scale. But let's see what we have. All right, as a reminder, these weights were $9.19. So we've put 120 grams of weight on the front. The total weight actually has increased ever so slightly. It was 1840, and now we're basically at 1900. So we put 60 grams total in the truck, which is probably a little bit due to all that weight that we put here in the front, moving that over here. The rear was 919, and now we're at 860. So again, there's 40, 50, there's about 60 off, 60 gained, 100 and something total here on the front. So, dude, look at this. We've actually shifted it. Now, honestly speaking, I still want more up there. We need to figure out a way to get even more weight. I've considered moving the ESC and everything up there also to continue to shift that weight. Probably eliminating the rear steer would help, because we get rid of a whole servo, and those servos are not light. So, I mean, there's some opportunity like that if we wanted to just reduce weight on the rear in order to help, get the weight bias more forward. Yeah, I have to consider otherwise if there's some other stuff that we want to do. But hey, now we need to get everything fired up in here, get the body pins on. Let's go take this thing for a drive. Now that's really good to see, because when this truck was first out here, it fell off and planted way down here because it was so high a center of gravity and everything. It actually rolled off and boomed right there. So all this modifications that we've done have really helped out. Final thoughts with this modifications. I mean, we've definitely continued to make this crawler a little bit better, step by step by step. It's kind of a Jekyll and Hyde at the moment for me. There are times in which this truck goes over stuff and it just astonishes me how easy it goes over things. And then there's other times in which I expect it, maybe I'm expecting too much of it, and I expect that it's going to go up something and it just doesn't quite. It seems like it's still those times in which it needs a little bit more front weight bias in order to let those front tires grab. You know, this is a very, very budget-oriented truck. And even all the stuff that I've done to it has been cost conscious in mind. And so I'm still really happy with how it performs. I mean, this truck still, with all the modifications I've done to it, comes in at a fraction of the cost of what some of the other ready-to-run 10 scale crawlers are on the market. And it does just as well, if not better, than a lot of those. And you know, it's cool. It's a fun truck. It's something different. It's not the normal scale stuff that you see. So I'm still really happy with it. Hope this video was useful for you. If you have a Danchee RidgeRock and you are looking to modify it, here are a couple cheap options to help you get that little bit extra performance out of it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any other questions about the Danchee RidgeRock, we actually have a video playlist for it over here. We will see you in that video. Thank you and goodbye.